So we're going to come back. We're going to come back to that many times because there's a few experiences in the book that you mention or that you isolate, right? As tremendous spiritual experiences you had. But, you know, I'm a child of the 70s and into the 80s, and our abuse was, I just thought it was standard in a way. And so as I was, and I think that's waned a lot in society, right? And now if you see a kid get hit in public, there's probably someone's going to probably do something about
Someone's
it, right?
calling CPS.
Yeah. And as a parent, even the way my kids look at me, they'll come and be like, yeah, go ahead and see what happens to you right now. That was not, I just thought it was the norm. So as I'm starting to listen to this book and hear about your mother's abuse, I was kind of thinking in my mind, okay, when is it that line is crossed? And a lot of that, so some of it must be the severity of the abuse, the emotional side of it, but then there's also neglect, right? And so, and I think that I'm intrigued in your story in a way because it's gonna help me. It's gonna empower me to help others because we're always in some, whether we should do it or not, we're kind of comparing circumstances.
Sure.
And sometimes we have to hear someone else's circumstance to be like, oh wow, that really puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
I certainly felt like early on that we were the only ones being abused, right? And it was just only happening to us, and everyone else has a good family. And then you kind of find out later, well, that may not be the case. But in the book, your mother, the Cinder Girl title, it comes from this kind of Cinderella, where you're the one that is chosen to be the servant.
Singled out for sure.
Right. Ultimately, there's 8 siblings that came from your mother and your father. She would have 2 more with a stepdad. We'll get to Herman later. But there's like 5 in the picture at the time when it seems to be the height of the abuse.
Yeah, when she first dubbed me the laundry lady.
Right.
When I was 7. And she'd always had picked on me before, but it was different. I remember that day just making my siblings chant laundry lady, laundry lady, laundry lady. And then they weren't allowed to call me by my name anymore. And then the names grew worse and worse and worse. And so I was at a young age when she singled me out. And I remember her hatred for me. I remember thinking about that as a kid. Like, why does my mom hate me? I could never be good enough. I could never be smart enough. And I talk about this in the book when I drew a photo for her in school and I wrote the word love wrong. I'll never forget that. I can think of it in my brain like it happened yesterday when I handed her that piece of paper and love was spelled L-U-V instead of L-O-V-E. And she ridiculed me and ripped it and told me I was too good for nothing, too stupid to do anything. And, now I'm just I'm good for nothing except to do laundry, and I just, in context now, I think about that. And again, now that I'm a mom, I'm like, how could you, something must be in my mother who's still alive, who I haven't seen since that day, Thanksgiving Day at 16. Something must be so broken in her to look at your baby, essentially. Like I was 7, just a baby, just a tiny little thing. Like, how could you look at your little girl like that and just ridicule her and shame her? And I just can't even, my brain doesn't understand that type of wickedness, the type of disconnect, the type of dysfunction. Like my mother is severely has mental illness.
Yeah. Did the emotional abuse start as early as like 4 and 5? Because I think I heard you say maybe the physical didn't start till around 6.
Yeah, the physical was later. The psychological, I would argue, and the emotional, by far, throughout my childhood and into my teens, was significantly worse than any beating she ever gave me. And it did start earlier. The emotional withholding on purpose, and again, like making my siblings chant things
Demon
about
girl.
me, demon and stupid, and making them applause when she would be beating me. I mean, she was so cruel to them too. I mean, kids don't do that. I mean, she was teaching them to abuse me, and some of them did. But yeah, I'd say the emotional and psychological was started well before, and then the physical got worse. But that's how it works. I've learned in relationship and hearing other stories and traveling the country and, my foundation, and working in the child rape trade and in, foster care you hear these stories of abuse and they're always the same. It always has a moment that it starts, and it's typically verbal or emotional or psychological first, and then it taps into physical, and then sexual.
Yeah.
So there's always like a gearing up almost to prepare your victim. But it always inevitably ends up into the physical or sexual place. So, yeah.
Was it, and this is what's interesting, like our beatings came from when you just did something wrong, you know, you need to pick up the room that you talk about. You're supposed to mop the floor. You'd never mop the floor. So certainly you're going to get, and she said, you know, I'm going to, basically, if you don't do it right, then
without ever showing me,
beat you until you learn how to do it right.
I was getting a beating anyways. It didn't matter.
But then here on the other side, you know, now it's like you bring home this picture. You talk about how excited you were to show your mom how hard you worked on this picture. And normally, when you have kids, I got 4 of them of my own. You know, it's like, oh, okay, I guess we'll work on the spelling later in life.
Yeah.
But this is cute, and you know, good try.
Attaboy.
Right, but you still get beat for that. But was it daily? Was it weekly?
Yeah. It was daily. I was
just every single day.
Yeah, I was definitely being abused every single day. I don't know if I was being beat up every single day. Certainly several times a week. I mean,
just stupid girl and you.
But the psychological emotional was an everyday occurrence, and I couldn't figure out. It took me. So even in the face of full-blown rejection and hatred, a child will still search for the approval of mom and dad. Period. You can literally do what my mother did to me and tell me that you hate me to my face and beat me up and ridicule me and shame me and reject me over and over and over and over again. And I will still be desperate for mom and dad's affection and support and love, because that's how kids are wired. That's how kids are wired. That's why kids who get adopted seek out their biological parents, because it's in you to want that from your mom and your dad.
Yeah.
Their approval, their love. And so it took me many years as an adult to finally release that, wanting my mother's love and approval, because I had to come to a place in my mind. She, wasn't capable, and I would never get it. Because there's always this small hope, right, that maybe she'll come around. But it's not possible when you're dealing with mental illness. But again, you have to have, a child will never understand that. They'll just keep going back to the dog that bites them.
Yeah.
Thinking the dog will change. But as an adult, you can mature and say, okay, that dog's going to keep biting me. So I'm going to lock the dog up and not go to that gate anymore.
So similar to what I was saying before about, at what point did you realize this was unique? And this was not all kids, like I was saying before, like, all kids get spanked by their dad or they get yelled at. But how did you come across
Middle school.
This is rare? Or so in elementary school, did you feel like, oh yeah, everyone's getting beat and called a demon and a whore or whatever when you're 7 or 8 years old?
No, but I was so, I didn't really know how to process relationship. I was so emotionally stunted. And in school, I was put out in the outside of the classroom because I was unhooked on phonics, because I was so developmentally delayed from all the abuse and trauma. And they didn't know I needed glasses. So for years I couldn't see the chalkboard. So I was just so behind in so many different ways, whether they were, I couldn't see physically and with my mental
And you were scared
blocks.
to take home that letter indicating that Christina needs glasses.
Oh
you had no idea.
No idea what they were saying. I just knew that my mother was going to beat me for it, and she did anyways, which I knew. Yeah. Because anything that she could, I remember being a child thinking to myself, anything that she could use to justify hurting me, she's going to. I knew it instinctually. And so, hiding that note was such a waste, but I did try.
But your father received it.
He did.
Or at least he was around for that.
He did. He got it first, and I remember being so afraid. But yeah, he was gracious, and he was like, she needs glasses. She didn't do anything. And I'm like, oh, she ended up, my mother was going to beat me anyway, so it doesn't matter what I was going to do. But
were there any good moments? Like, was there a handful of...
I can't think of... I know it's so funny people ask me this about my mother. I honestly cannot remember any good moments with her, not one. And my father, yeah. Mm-hmm. My father had lots of good moments until they took him away and threw him in jail unconstitutionally.
We'll get to that.
But my mother, even right now, I'm trying to go through the Rolodex of memory, and a lot of it is, disassociated, because of the trauma. I can't think of one moment where she held my hand or told me she loved me or made me feel anything positive.